Hi guys, welcome back to the Earthy Delights podcast, where this week I'm going to be talking to one of my good friends from uni, but I don't actually want to call her a uni friend anymore. I want to call her my actor friend, so that when she makes it famous and wins an Oscar or something, we can say that we had an Oscar winner on the podcast. So yeah, here's my actor friend, Ella McCallum, who will
Hello.
be talking. Here she is. Look at that beautiful London accent.
Hello.
She's a staunch Tory. No, I'm joking.
Must be in.
But yeah. So we're going to talk today about the kind of relationship that she had with has with her dad, and his addiction to alcohol and drugs, and kind of just the consequences of that, rather than getting into the details of the actual addiction itself. So, but before we get into any of that juicy business, let's start off with what's the crack. How are we doing, Ella?
Hello, Seb. I'm not bad, thank you. Bit of a weird time to be asking that question because I'm not really doing much with my life. But I'm doing okay considering. I'm getting all the things I wanted to watch on Netflix out the way.
Nice. It's some interesting stuff as well. To be fair, at the moment, I feel like
Yeah.
they kind of almost knew about the coronavirus because they're releasing loads of good shit
Yeah.
all at once, And that you're currently watching the Tiger King, aren't you?
I am. I'm
Yeah,
very confused.
it's genuinely incredible. Like it doesn't make sense. Like if someone told me that they were going to do a film about it or whatever, or like a fictional piece, I would have been like, even that's too far fetched. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm not the most imaginative types, but the fact that all of it is real is just quite something else. But yeah,
It's bizarre, and I've spent loads of time. I've somehow managed to video chat with all of the friends that I should have been keeping in contact with before. Got ones in Australia and Argentina, and we're actually all making the effort to talk every few days, which is a good thing, I think.
Yeah. I've started using. I hate FaceTime as a rule, but I've started using it in that house party app or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
Just need to see faces, just to remind me that there's actually other humans in this world. But yeah, hopefully it passes soon. But let's not waste any more time because I feel like this could be a juicy interview podcast, conversation, however you want to call it. So let's go straight into the main segment. Okie dokie. So first off, do you want to just kind of explain what your dad's addiction and kind of like how you came about it? Because to be honest, I'm not sure if you ever told us when we were at uni together, unless it slipped my mind. But I feel like that's something that wouldn't have slipped my mind. So do you kind of just want to fill people in who aren't really aware of the situation?
Yeah. So yeah, like you said, I lived with you for 2 years and may have mentioned it once or twice. It's not something that it's not a conversation starter for me. But so my dad is 10 and a half years sober, from September. Yeah, 10 and a half years sober now. So from sort of his late teens, 20s, up until me being the age of 13, he was an addict. And since then, he has been in recovery.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's the general gist.
Was he a functioning addict? Just because I
Yes.
don't know, I'd never met him, but just the way you talk about him and stuff, I kind of always seen that he was like a kind of put together guy who had his shit together. So I assumed that he was a functioning addict at the very least. No.
Yeah, absolutely. There's very few memories that I have as a child of him being under the influence or anything like that. We were very sheltered from it in a way. And so he, had this really great job and worked his way up in an industry he had no experience in. He met and married my mum. He had 3 children. So it's not your typical story that I think we're told a lot about addiction, especially with alcohol and drugs, that, this is a slippery slope and your life is ruined, which obviously is very, very likely to happen. But I think it's an interesting conversation to have of those people that suffer from addictions, it doesn't need to be drink or drug related, but all kinds of addictions and they still manage to maintain what people would call a general standard of life, a normal standard of life.
Mm. How did you like come about finding about this information? Did he come and tell you, or did you start to put two and two together, or?
So I was, I think, 11 or 12, and my dad had been staying at a friend's for a couple of days. And we sort of got sat down, me and my sister, who were at the home at the time, and they said that he has a problem with alcohol and he will be going to meetings for that. And at the time, it was sort of weird because it was quite unexpected. It was never something I'd ever considered happening. So it didn't really sink in what that meant for him in
Mm.
terms of his mental well-being or where he was at. Because, you know, when you're 12 years old, your dad is superhero. You don't
Yeah, yeah.
ever assume that anything's wrong. And so then when I was about, we knew this was happening. And then when I was 13, um, I came home one day after school and no one was in. And there was a piece of paper on the kitchen table, and me, just being my usual nosy self, started to read it. And it was one of his speeches from his meetings, and it went into a bit more detail and it mentioned drug use, which I was sort of blindsided by. Um,
Mm.
so then ensued a very dramatic reaction from Ella, naturally.
Yeah.
And yeah, that kind of led to the conversation, which is obviously not the way that was intended, but I do understand my parents' reasoning in uh, just talking about the alcohol when we're at that age, because we're not at an age
Mm.
to comprehend anything more than that. But that definitely was a sort of little explosion in our household.
Yeah.
Sort of the conversation coming before it, we were necessarily ready for it, and that our parents were ready to have that conversation.
Yeah, I can only imagine because I remember when I was young, I think I'm similar to most guys or most like people. It's just that when I was young, I was like, oh, I'm never going to smoke a cigarette. I'm never going to do this. Do you know what I mean? That's how you think when you're young. And then you realize that these things slowly but surely seep their way in, especially when you're at uni. But to think that like, do you know what I mean? I imagine that you kind of had that same perspective when you were younger, at least, and then to kind of think that maybe your dad, like you said, who was a superhero, like we all see our parents that way, actually was kind of compromised by these things that, especially as kids, I feel like as kids we almost demonize them more than what they actually should be, in a sense, you know.
Completely. I am. This is quite funny. I haven't thought about this in ages, but my dad. So both my parents used to smoke, and my mum quit as soon as she got pregnant with my older sister. But my dad
Mm.
used to carried on smoking, and I must have been about 8 or 9, and smoking used to upset me so much. There's no laughing. That I used to cry in my bedroom when my dad used to go outside and smoke, and
Oh
it
Jesus.
basically led me and my sister would get so upset. I would convince myself that, you know, he was going to die if he had another cigarette. And he quit smoking. I assume it was because of our reaction. Maybe it was something different, but I remember that being such a thing to me, of going, this is something that could take my dad away.
Yeah,
And so the
yeah,
idea then of how learning that your parents kind of have these vices or aren't as infallible as you assumed, it's a
mm.
massive shock. And I think it came at a time most people learn that their parents are human beings a bit later on, and I
Yeah,
think learning that so young has quite a big impact.
100%. I was just going to bring that point up. I was just, I mean, I think that recently, in my own personal situation, that I've kind of, I mean, I always knew that my parents were flawed human beings just because they're human beings, but
Mm-hmm.
it kind of hit me harder over this divorce and everything else, and you start to see the worst sides of people. And unfortunately, and not that you are your worst self, it was just we all
Yeah.
have the ability to. But I was what 21, 20 when that happened, and so obviously, even though it hit me hard, I was a lot more kind of prepared to deal with that situation. And also, a divorce is, it's different. It's not, I don't want to say embarrassing, but I can't imagine that at the age of 13 you would have been able to confide in many, friends and stuff, because number one, at 13, there's the emotional intelligence there is zero. And also because to admit to your friends that, like, because I'm sure your friends would have come over to your house and had sleepovers and all the rest of it, you know, to admit to your friends that like your dad is an addict, which as we just said, at a young age kind of seems worse than we maybe think it is now. How was that for you? Like, who did you confide in? What was your reaction to it all?
So the day that I came home and found the letter, I actually I walked out, I stormed out the house before anyone had got home, and I got on a bus and I was walking around this park that was near the house of my best friend, and I remember calling her, and I just couldn't say it.
Yeah.
I remember I was so hysterical, but I was going to say something, and then it was this kind of, yeah, I don't know if you would call it shame, but it just was this thing of I didn't want to accept that that's what was happening. And so I just decided to not say anything. And I didn't tell her. I kind of just made an excuse that I'd had an argument with my parents and it was fine and I was going to go home now. And it took me a long, long time. I don't think I actually told any of my best friends until I was about 16.
Right.
And I think it kind of then starts a chain of events of I can be, like you probably know, I'm not afraid to talk about emotions or feelings. I love a good cry, as is mentioned in I think like the first episode of this podcast.
Yeah.
But think I'm very open in that sense. But when it's something that I personally am struggling with, I do have a tendency to keep it in and to not want to share it. And I think that was probably the first example of me going, actually, I don't want people to know, I don't want people to have ownership over this and to use a word. Because when you hear words like addiction, I think people make assumptions. And that's why I kind of thought that this was an interesting thing to talk about, because it's not something I will open up on often, because I worry about the way people interpret words like addict and recovery. And so, yeah, that's kind of why I thought this would be interesting to talk to you here, because I'm actually able to, justify is the wrong word, but
explain.
Yeah.
I mean, it has so many different faces. There's, you know, obviously there's addiction to drugs, and then obviously and alcohol, and obviously then within those drugs there's varying degrees, you know, and then you've got gambling addiction, which I think some people probably don't even really recognize as an addiction. They just think, oh no, you can just stop, and it's like, well, no, like, and you know, it's hard. It may be even harder in some aspects because you're not under the influence, so to speak, so you can't see the direct kind of consequences of doing those actions. It's kind of a silent addiction. There's so many, you know, the sex addiction. There's so many different addictions where people just take them for like granted and like, tarnish everyone under the same brush. And I do think it's important, especially, you know, for someone of your background, of your, you know, you gone to Leeds Uni and all the rest of it, to show that like you can have a dad or, you know, mom or whatever, a parent who was addicted, and yet still, at least on the face of it, you know, have what you would see as a kind of a fully functioning family. I mean, for example, you know, your dad was an addict, my parents weren't, but my parents are divorced, your parents are still together. So on the face of it, you would look at your parents and go, oh, well, Ella's parents have got it hunky-dory, just like they're you know, great family. And then actually you delve into it, and the more I do this podcast and the more I speak to people, the more I realize that it doesn't matter how perfect their life may look, they can go to the Maldives every 2 weeks, it's still, everyone has their own shit. That just is the way, you know. And I think it is definitely important to kind of talk about this. I think when I just want to question, you know, you said you kind of said I didn't tell my best friends until I was like 16. So that's like 3 years. Does that imply that you kind of told people who were maybe not so close to you and therefore your parents? I ask because I found it a lot easier to, for example, to tell people about my parents' failings and shortcomings and what they were doing in the divorce and all this to people who didn't necessarily know my parents. But yet Louisa, who knows them very intimately, I didn't really want to open up to Louisa about it because I didn't want to tarnish their image in Louisa's eyes. You know, I didn't want to tell Louisa all the bad things that my mom and dad are saying or doing, because then Louisa's going to have to, on next Sunday, come around my house and act like it's all fine. Whereas I'd much rather tell someone who I know is probably never going to see my parents. And it was a lot easier for me to open up. I'm not sure if that was the same with you or...
I think so. In the first few years, I didn't talk to anyone at all.
Right.
That was, but I completely agree in terms of like, I find it much easier to talk to strangers or, yeah, people I don't know as well. People love to use a rehearsal room for some free therapy, which I am reluctant to do. But I do think to talk about things without the emotional aspect of it, I think I'm very good at. It's because I can tell people a sort of factual version of events. But when it comes to people I know very well, it's that idea of going, these are friends. A lot of my closest friends I've known since I was like primary school age, 3 or 4. So they know
Yeah.
my dad almost, sort of like cousins. And so yeah, it's hard to kind of admit and go, well, yeah, they're not perfect. But I also think it's that it's this weird taboo and stigma around addiction, because the addiction is a kind of facilitator for, or fixer solution to the underlying mental health issues, which I think is
Mm.
a really important thing to do. And some people deal with their illnesses and their mental ill health in all these different ways, and I think addiction is one of those solutions. Obviously it doesn't work in the long run, but in the
Yeah.
beginning it's a self-medication.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of it's almost harder when someone knows your family really well. It feels, yeah, it does feel a bit, you use the word embarrassing, and I get what you mean. It's probably not the right word, because I don't think it's something I'm embarrassed of, but
No. Yeah.
it's kind of having to admit that everything isn't as great as they seem. But I also want to
Yeah.
take the time to say that I am so lucky in so many ways, and so privileged and so grateful to have the parents that I have. Um, that I and there's a lot of things that aren't perfect about my life, but who doesn't have that? And
Yeah.
I think it's not a surefire way to go, oh, your life isn't as great as everyone thinks, because everyone has things. It's just that this is
Mm.
my thing, and
Yeah.
I can't relate to a lot of other people's in terms of divorce. I'm very lucky that my parents are still together, and I'm able to live at home and to not worry about things like that. But this is now sort of my niche of family trauma,
Mm.
which I'm sure everyone has their own niche, but
Yeah. Yeah.
addiction is mine.
Yeah, we all have I would call it depression top trumps. It's like who who has the worst scenario, do you know? And we're just like, well, I actually have this scenario. It's like, oh yeah, fair enough, she wins, she wins. Um, but I wanted to ask, do you think that it, because obviously we kind of met together, just for people who don't know, at halls in first year. We were put together in the same flat, and then we went to live together in second year. I kind of always, even though like you're funny and like you play, you're happy-go-lucky type person, I always kind of within the house, both house, first year and second year, always thought of you as actually the most emotionally intelligent. And I probably didn't put two and
Oh.
two together. No, genuinely. But I wonder if it's because you kind of had to come to, you have to face those realities when you were 13 years old, and so you've realized, you talk about mental health and all the rest of it, you had to realize these things a lot earlier than maybe the rest of us do. Now I think of it, before I kind of fell into depression and the rest of it, I thought that depression, I was kind of a bit Neanderthal about it, and I used to think that depression was, you were just a bit sad, put a smile on it, people have it worse, do you know what I mean, go out, it's all good. And then you get into it and you're into the throes of depression, and you're like, oh, for fuck's sake, this is not what I thought it
This
was.
is really shit.
Yeah, maybe people were right, but I had that realization when I was like 20 or whatever it was. And since then I then started a podcast. But you kind of came to that realization when you were 13, so I wonder, did that kind of make you a lot more emotionally mature compared to your friends and everything else, who maybe have that kind of hunky-dory lifestyle where everything, at least on paper anyway, seems perfect?
Um, in terms of emotional maturity, I wouldn't say that I learned that very early on, but I think I learned coping mechanisms, and they weren't always usually the best ones, especially being a teenager. I think, like most people, I've had my fair share of sort of mental ill health, but I think, yeah, it kind of taught me, and I'm really grateful for my dad. I've inherited his sense of humor completely. I make probably far too many inappropriate jokes. I'm not afraid to laugh at myself or laugh at the awfulness of life, but I think having that experience quite early on it's your bubble of kind of fantasy and infallibility. It bursts, and you have to sort of go, right, well, things aren't always going to be great, and this is really shit and it feels awful. But I think that it kind of it I think a lot of my personality has derived from that. You call me happy go lucky, and I sometimes find myself as someone that's, you know, painfully insecure and second guesses everything and is completely in my own head. But I think I've spent so much time in my teenage years sort of struggling with those feelings that I know how awful it feels, and I don't want anyone else to feel that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I think having that, I'm much more in tune with other people's emotions, and reading rooms, I think, is a big thing that we people probably learn too late. And so I think, it's that thing. I think I might have just stolen a Robin Williams quote, but
it's fine. We'll play it off. Ella 2020. Ellie McCallum 2020.
But yeah, so I think there's a thing about not wanting to bring the mood down. But I think you also, I remember you being quite like that in a different way, but you were very much, unless we were having one of our little heart-to-hearts in the house alone, you were very much trying to keep things up and keep things happy and fun. So I wouldn't say that you were, I would say you were immature in many, many senses.
Yeah, fair play.
But
take it on the chin.
But I wouldn't necessarily say that you were, you know, completely lacking emotional maturity. I just think that especially men are taught that they're not allowed to have those feelings. And I always felt comfortable. I wouldn't say I felt comfortable, but I always knew that there was a safe space for me with, you know, parents or friends or whoever to go and talk to and cry to. I've cried to you many times. But I knew that. And I do think that maybe that's something that men aren't taught.
Yeah, I think it's something that we've had to unlearn.
Yeah, completely.
I used to, I'm not sure if I've said on the podcast before, but I went from the age of 13 to 21, which was when my parents got divorced, where I didn't like cry a single tear. I remember talking to you about it at uni, and you and Mirren would be like, "Oh my god, what?" We sometimes, when we don't cry for like 2 months because everything's been good, we just watch a sad film to make ourselves cry. And couldn't get my head over. I still really can't get my head over
cathartic.
that. But I did realize that actually, you know, crying isn't the worst thing in the world, and is sometimes actually necessary and needed. But it was kind of weird because when I would say that to people, I haven't cried in 7 years, whilst that was completely true, and I knew that it was weird and it probably shouldn't be the case. Because it wasn't like my life was perfect in those 7 years, nor was it terrible, you know. But you know, you should cry over normal things as well. It doesn't have to be life or death situations. But there was also a part of me that I had to unlearn, which was I was almost proud of it as like this man who hadn't cried in 7 years. Do you know what I mean? And then when I finally did cry, I think it was about the mum and dad's divorce, but then it was about everything else as well. Like it just all came out. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. I did kind of feel like it was necessary to keep spirits high at all times, and you know what I mean, just act stupid if that's what I had to do to get a laugh or whatever it was, or dance around to James Blunt, "You're Beautiful" in costume, and then that's what I had to do.
I've still got the videos.
Yeah, I know. Hopefully, I don't become too famous from this podcast. I feel like they will get released the moment I do. But what I want to say is that you know, for example, within the house, I would say that my best friend was Alex. Yet when it came to you know, times where I had to have a bit of heart or whatever, you know, for example, when I was going to live with the guys, and then I kind of switched last minute. I was like, oh, this is a bad decision. And then I was like, no, fuck, I need to live with Ella and the rest of the gang. I didn't go to Alex and to tell that decision. I didn't go to Mirren or anyone else. Do you know what I mean? I went straight into your bedroom and I was like, Ella. And like, we had yeah, and then we had like a conversation, but it's just because I recognized that like you were the right person to have that conversation with. And it wasn't, I didn't know about your dad at that point, but there was just something inherently, I didn't almost maternal. I don't know what it was, but that I could just tell that like with you, even though you might not have been my bestest friend in uni or whatever it may be, with you, I could have those conversations. I was just wondering if that did come from kind of your previous experiences. I think in some part it must have done. Was that the same with your friends? Like, because I talked to Jim, and obviously Jim's mum passed away when he was young, and he said that like he's kind of amongst his friends like almost become like the grief connoisseur. Do you know what I mean? Like when someone dies, whatever, everyone goes to Jim like, oh Jim, how do we deal with this? And it's like, I was just wondering, like, it's not obviously with addiction, but like once your friends started to know, did you kind of become the agony aunt for your friendship group?
I think when, so I can kind of see myself more in that role now, in terms of I like to make it very clear, or I hope I make it clear to my friends, that I'm always someone that can be spoken to about these things without judgment or anything. But I think probably for context sake, when I started to tell people, it would usually come out when I was very, 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 very drunk, as most, a gathering on a Saturday night. And I think that was almost my way of dealing with it, kind of ironically, was I deal with my dad's addiction by getting really drunk. But I also think that's a coping mechanism a lot of teenagers deal with. So the starts of those conversations, or the roots of those conversations, didn't really start properly until I'd gone to uni, I think, because it would be, I would get drunk and I would cry and I would tell someone about it, and then kind of wake up and pretend it had never happened. I think that shame kind of did carry through a bit, and so I spent a good few years just not feeling very happy and not knowing how to talk about it. And so I think, there's kind of, it's weird. Again, using your family top trumps thing, some of my closest friends have gone through really, really awful things, and so I wouldn't say there's necessarily one position of being like, right, you're the god on this topic, but it's funny how it kind of translates into my family. Like, with friends and everything, I'm very open and I'm very willing to have kind of difficult conversations now. But when I asked my dad for permission to talk about this on the podcast, I kind of remember going really stony faced, and I had to prepare myself, and I'm very reluctant to talk about it emotionally to my family, which I think is probably something that will have to develop over time eventually, but it still feels quite raw to me. But so my dad, he ran upstairs when I asked, and he said, I'm just going to write you some context. And I thought, oh God, please don't. I said, is this going to make me cry? And he was like, probably. And I won't read out the whole thing, but it's sort of, I think it's a really brilliant way of kind of talking to me, but also knowing that I lack the strength to not just cry. But he said this really great thing, which I want to read, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course,
it's really little. But so he's in the letter, he's gone through the context of his brother passed away overnight when he was very, very young, and he always kind of had a problem with shyness and social awkwardness, and drinking and drugs became the medication for that. But so it kind of goes on this story, and it's quite sad, and then it just says at the end, reading back, this sounds full of pain, but my life has also been full of joy and laughs and not insignificant personal achievement. I'm blessed in having a lovely family who I love beyond all things, and who are all smart, funny and capable. So not much to moan about, really, Dad.
And very British.
Yeah, so British, but I just thought that was such a brilliant sort of capture of him, of, things can, and sort of both of our personal outlooks of things can be really shit. But sorry, am I allowed to swear? I just
you can do whatever you want, all the profanities.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Um, but it's just such a brilliant way of, of trying to stay positive, because
Yeah.
that radiates through people, and you can feel that and pass
Mm,
that on without sounding really hippy
mm.
dippy.
No, 100%. I think that I've gone recently perspective. No, that's kind of what he's saying is like, all in all, not too shabby, really.
Yeah.
When you see like, and I that's like with me with my own thing. And someone yesterday said to me that they were crying because they were a bit upset, like with the coronavirus and lockdown. It's all getting a bit too much, and I said, look, I'm not telling you that this is the antidote for all sadness, but my thing is perspective. And it's just always thinking that, like, look, okay, this is shit or whatever it may be. But, I said to my friend in the case of the lockdown, I was like, look, you're in lockdown, but you're in a lovely place where you can, and you're in England where so you're allowed to go out for your daily walks and you have a dog and blah, blah. It's like, think about people in Spain and Italy, myself, but others who are a lot worse off who can't go out for a walk and have lost their jobs. And I
Mhm.
just think if you kind of keep that perspective and then keep things in, like, you're with your friends and blah blah, you're healthy in the coronavirus case anyway, that it helped me anyway to kind of get out of things. And when I was like depressed and whatever, I was like, okay, look, my parents are split up, but none of them have died. I've still got them. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, I know some of my friends, their parents have committed suicide or died early, from unforeseen kind of circumstances, and then you kind of feel like a dickhead, basically complaining about a divorce
Um,
when you're like, my mate over here hasn't got a mum. That's like my own personal thing. And then
yeah.
I speak to those people and they go, mate, that's that, like, as Jim's one of them. Like I said to Jim, I was like, oh, I feel bad complaining about my divorce to you when like your mum passed away when you were so young. And he was like, bro, like that's fine. Like, it's not because I have a bad thing means that your thing is less
Hmm.
important or whatever it is. That's just your reality. I'm not going to say your truth because I hate that, but your reality, and so you're living it, and so you find it hard. But that, I find perspective a huge helper, and it seems that your dad obviously has done that as well with your dad. Like, I just from what you would tell us at uni and stuff, I kind of always got this feeling that you were kind of best friends with your dad. That was like the feeling that you would give off when you'd speak about him. Like, that was how your relationship was. It was kind of like a friendly relationship rather than like a father-daughter respect-based relationship.
He'll
I
hate that. No, I agree. I think he's me. I was going to say on drugs, but that's probably not appropriate. I am so my dad's daughter. But I think, yeah, we're not the kind of buddy where we talk about boys and very personal things, but he's very much a joker and a big kid. Absolutely.
Mm,
That's not to say he didn't tell us off when we were growing up. Like, he's like a 6'3" Essex guy. He can be quite scary, but
yeah.
he's always been very funny and playful, and I think that's almost what I found the hardest. I think when I was 16 and I was going through some things personally, I went to see a counsellor, and
Mm-hmm.
I remember she said this thing which I kind of mentioned earlier, but she said that your dad's always been your knight in shining armor kind of thing, which is probably the case
Mm,
for a lot of kids, and to realize that armor isn't so true, or to kind of have to see the faults in people.
yeah.
um yeah, I think because we had that sort of friendship, um that was what was so hard, but I don't think that that's necessarily changed at all. I think it's made me have so much more respect for him, and sort of, I think that's where a lot of my um, persona comes from, in terms of
Mm,
I don't ever want people to feel, upset or lonely or unwelcome, and I think I probably got that from him.
was when you kind of found out, and what was the main feeling? Would you say it was deception? Would you say that, like, was that the one, like, when you found out, and then like the
Yeah.
stages, like, did you go through a kind of, like, was there almost a punishment stage, like, as in where you were kind of punishing your dad, like, be it by, I don't know, ignoring him or shouting at him or whatever it was, and then a kind of like, what was it with the relationship with your dad? As it, obviously you're in a good place now, but I assume that when it kind of happened and then the years after that, it wasn't so easy. just to kind of get over it? Were there stages, or was it like kind of dealt with and nipped in the bud?
I think I wouldn't actually say that there was a negative impact that happened within the family itself. I think that it was more the aftershock that we all kind of felt individually, I think was probably a bit of an issue. Was I remember finding out, and I stormed out, and when I came home that night, we kind of had a conversation, and then from then it was never really discussed. It wasn't really brought up, and I think that's my dad would sometimes try to initiate conversation, and I'd very swiftly cut him off, which I do have some regret about. But I also think for me as a person to deal with things, I sort of need to, sometimes I just need to shut the conversation down. And that's obviously something I have to work on. But I think me and my mum have never really discussed it.
Right.
I remember we had a conversation once where I suddenly got this memory. It's probably only in the last 5 years or something, but I have this memory, and I don't know how old I am, but I remember standing at the top of the staircase with my sister, and it's dark, and my mum's at the door, and she's opened the door to my dad, who, now looking back on it, was like under the influence. And I remember being told to go back to bed. And then the next morning, my mum had said that he'd stayed at a friend's. And it was so bizarre because I still have this such clear memory, but I don't. I don't know the context of it. But then my mum said to me once that when it was all happening, and quickly before he got sober, she basically said to him, "If you stop now, or I take the kids and I go."
Yeah.
And so it kind of equally made me have a lot of respect for both of them. My mum knowing that she's strong enough to do that, and my dad loving us so much that that's a catalyst to sort yourself out. But I think we don't really discuss it that often. And
would you change that if you could? Like now, would you talk? Not saying every day at the dinner table, but as and when it props up, or if you see something kind of in a film that maybe like would be the catalyst for a conversation or whatever it may be, would you be more open to that now, especially now that you're of an age where you can kind of really talk about it properly and adultly rather than a 13-year-old? Would you change that, or are you kind of happy with the status quo and leave it where it is and let's just move on?
I think I'm happy in the knowledge that I know I can ask my dad anything. I know I could ask him the most personal questions and he would give me a proper answer. I think it speaks more about the impact it's had on me rather than how he's dealt with it, because I think given the circumstances, they've been amazing. It's more that I really struggle to even talk about it without being very emotionless, just talking about the factual stuff. But I don't know. I think in an ideal world we'd all be able to talk about it and go to family therapy, and it would be great. But I think it has given me a kind of coldness is completely the wrong word, but an emotional off switch sometimes that I think I probably use in other situations now as a result.
Yeah, and what I like you say though, but sometimes I think that that it's that's necessary. We often get pushed this idea that like a problem has to be solved in that instance, and that that everything has to be out in the open, and this, that, and the other, and I think yes, there's a time for that, but I also think there's a time to kind of seek solace and to just go on your own and to be able to think about things. Just purely yesterday, my dad he's very Sicilian and he can hold a grudge better than anyone I know. But he was, if he argued with be it my mum or whoever it may be, he would just go silent on them rather than like scream and shout and blah, blah, blah. He'd just go silent. And that may potentially last 3-4 days, which obviously then is terrible because then the whole house is just in this awful kind of under this cloud of just horribleness, But and that seeped through to me, and it was something that I inherited, which I realized wasn't a good thing to inherit, right? But having said that, I've definitely tried to shorten the time periods. But yesterday, for example, Louise and I had an argument, and it just didn't feel right to say, "Oh yeah, it's fine, don't worry about it, kiss and make up after 5 minutes," because I was still pissed off.
Yeah.
So like, I'm not gonna lie. So I just like took the night. It was whatever. We spoke about it in the morning, and then it's fine. It's forgotten about. But if we did that, that the night of, it would have been fake, it would have been false, because I would have still been fuming at her. And
Mm-hmm.
I'd have just had to pretend that, oh, it's all cool because that's what you're supposed to do, never sleep on an argument and all that bullshit. But sometimes actually sleeping on it is good, and it just that depend, everyone's different, right? And so if you needed to have a bit of an emotional off switch, or maybe just kind of contemplate things yourself, or whatever it may be, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but I think we're kind of been taught to think that is a bad thing. I think as long as it's controlled, I don't want to say that doing what my dad did for 3-4 days is that's the best way of dealing with it. But maybe it is at night, or if it's just an evening where you know what, I just want to spend time and watch stupid movies and cry by myself, and I just don't want to talk to anyone, then that's absolutely fine. I think that's normal. And like you said, you have to kind of carry on with things as well. I think there's a fine balance between sweeping it under the rug and bringing it out in your day to day. Like you have to kind of address it, but also you have to move on with your life. Like you can't keep on talking about it every day.
I think that's as well something that's so interesting in terms of like in acting, and what I do is I'm completely the same as you. I go very internal, and I don't like to discuss things and go into things and over talk, and which is, some people think that that's really bad, but I also just think that that is an inherent part of my personality, and there are good ways that you can do it and there are bad ways that you can do it, and the bad ways are when it then turns into having different coping mechanisms, like addiction, like disordered eating, like self-harm. But then there are the good ways, which I've slowly started to learn, are things that I need to cope with things. Like I love just dancing. It sounds so like I just love dancing around my bedroom, being really silly. And I think acting is definitely one of those outlets. I had to say to you before we started that I just need to not do an accent, because I just like to go on silly little tangents and talk rubbish. And I love to go on really long walks by myself and listen to podcasts and not stifle my laughter. And I think there are ways that people can take themselves away from situations to cope that aren't necessarily hermiting away, and it's really bad for your mental health. I think that knowing what your kind of language of grieving or healing is so important.
Yeah, 100%. And communicating that with others, like just being like, because like you said, people have it differently. Some people love to get out in the open, and they want, Louise, as much of the let's resolve it now, and like let's just kiss and make up and like just get over it. It's kind of similar to my mum. And like I'm like my dad, I'm like that doesn't work for me, because I can do it, but I'm still going to be pissed off at you. So, and then actually having falsified this whole thing, it's just going to make me even more pissed off at myself. So now we're just in a worse off situation. But a lot of the time, like you said, I'll go to a park, or a bit dramatic, but I'll play some like just music that I love, or I'll write a poem. Might be shit, might be great, who knows? But I'll just sit there, just because I find getting things out on paper sometimes is so much better. I've done this so many times where I'm going to write this person a letter and send it to them, and then I've written the letter. And I've gone, right, let me just leave it on my computer, wherever it is, for a couple of days. And then if in a couple of days I still want to send it, I'll send it.
Yeah, that's 100%. Great. I like that.
100% of the time, I've never sent it. I've never sent that letter. And it's not because I'm fearful or anything like that, but it's because after the 2-3 days of getting it out on paper, I then go, you know what, I'm over it, or I'm dealing with it now better, or it's not so kind of pent up as it was. Do you know what I mean? And I haven't told them, I haven't hurt their feelings. It's just on a piece of paper that I can throw away, or an email that I can, discard, and that's that. And it's done. But that's my way of dealing with it. But as long as like you communicate that with that person, just kind of know,
Yeah, and I think that's what my family know about me inherently, that I and my friends also sort of catched on, but caught on. But I think, I'm not one for grand displays of emotion and crying and hugging. I'm not a very tactile person. I never have been. And they know that about me. And so it's something I'm never pushed into situations where I feel uncomfortable. But I have sometimes felt in like a rehearsal room which can often be an absolute game of top trumps trauma, with people wanting to sort of validate almost why they're allowed to talk on subjects. And it's something I really struggle with. And I had a phase last year where where I thought, I just want to take a break from theatre. I don't know if this is the space for me. And I've since learnt that it is. It just depends on the people in that room. But for me, I don't think that I need to take chunks out of myself and put that into a performance to make it good. Like I did a show a couple of years ago that was all about eating disorders. And it was made through workshopping with people that had eating disorders, that were still suffering with them. And so it was very, very personal, and it was a really, really tough show, but it was brilliant. But it was just that thing of me going every day. There was a scene where I had to stand at the front of the stage and pretend there was a mirror, and I had to burst into tears. And it is so emotionally taxing that I kind of had to distance myself from it, because I thought, who hasn't been a teenager and looked in the mirror and hated what they see? I think the majority have. And so for me to put myself in that situation and put it all out on the line, I think it'd be so detrimental for my mental health that I needed to separate myself. And I don't think that like negates from a performance, or just, not to, if people do that and it works for them, then great. But I now know it's kind of given me a sort of strength in my own beliefs,
abilities.
and to just go, this is not how I do it. And I'm not going to have someone tell me that I need to put myself in a dangerous situation to do something well.
Yeah, I always found that method acting a bit strong. Like, I'm obviously not an actor, but I was always like, Jesus. I mean, do you know what I mean? But then you hear, like, I was actually just recently listening to Daniel Radcliffe on Desert Island, and he was talking about how some of the actors on there, and obviously they were all like, when he was a child, they were all amazing actors. The people that were on there, the names escape me now, but the famous actresses and actors that were on there. And he was saying that some of them had to like kind of go away for like a couple of hours before a shoot to really get into the role or whatever, or would even like be in their role off camera because they couldn't kind of switch it on and off. And then he said that some of the guy who did Hagrid, for example, I forget the actor's name now, but he could like just literally, he could be laughing and joking with you, and then the next minute they go, right, camera action, and then he'd be Hagrid. But before, like 30 seconds before that, he was just the normal guy. He was just a normal human being. And yet, you look at Harry Potter, I don't think Hagrid's up there with any of the performances that you see. That kind of method acting always kind of scared me, because I always thought it must take such a toll on you. And then I always thought, maybe you can speak to this more, but what happens afterwards? So after the show's done, or that like you've kind of been this person or character for however many months, or if it's a film, potentially years. And then what? You just like, I'd never understood it really personally, but I mean, hey, each to their own.
Each to their own. And if it works for you, it works for you. But there's this brilliant interview with Toni Collette, who's one of my favorite actresses. And she says, someone asked her a question about how did you manage to cope emotionally with, doing those scenes in Hereditary? And she's like, it's just acting. There's a little Australian accent for you there, if anyone wants to cast me.
Lovely.
But it's that idea that it's performing, and I think Andrew Scott in the How to Fail podcast, he kind of says this thing about I can't be around people that put it on this pedestal, because whilst I do think that arts and performance is so important for our mental health, for performers and watchers, I just also kind of have this thing niggling in my ear of going, you're not doing brain surgery.
Yeah.
My mum
Denzel Washington said something so similar.
Really? Yeah. It's just going I'm not set, you could metaphorically be saving lives, but I always like to put myself, to remind myself that it's just pretending. You're playing, you're pretending to be someone else. And if people love that, then brilliant. And if you can be paid to do that, then that's amazing. But it kind of it makes it easier for me to deal with the reality of trying to be an actor, of going, I'm just trying to pretend to do something.
Yeah. Exactly that is the job, isn't it? Just to pretend to be someone that you're not.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I mean, that is literally acting. That is what it is. And Denzel Washington said the same thing. He said someone, because you know how it is. Like, people try to get really deep with it, no matter what it is. Do you know what I mean? You could like be washing your dishes and people will try to get deep with it, and some like journalist was talking about it, and he said, look, like that woman said, Tony Collette said, he said, look, it's acting. He said the really difficult jobs are like the people who go on and they're fighting wars and they're doing this and they're doing that. He said, I am being paid millions of dollars to pretend to be someone.
Yeah.
That is all I'm doing, and I'm doing a good job. But like that, because I mean, I'm getting the awards or whatever. But it's no further than that. It's like, don't get it twisted. And I think like, but again, it's perspective, right? I think he has his shit together, and he's got things in perspective where he's realized that what he's doing, and this isn't just acting, by the way. I think this like goes for all jobs. We all, I say it to all of them, where I'm doing social media management right at now. I don't really particularly like my job, but it's what I've got to do because I'm in Spain. I don't have any contacts, and it's the first job I got. But I talk to people who are in my sector, who are like friends that I used to work with, who've moved on to other like jobs, and they're still in the same sector, but they're different companies. And I go, oh, how are you going? Typical question, how's work, blah, blah, blah. And they always come up with the same thing. Oh, so good. I'm learning loads, blah, blah. And I know it's bullshit, because I know that like once you've done 6 months in that sector, you kind of learn almost all there is to know. And then after that, it's very repetitive. And sometimes I just question them and I go, why are you lying to me? Like, I know like what it is. Like, you don't have to make out it's something that it's not. Like, it's all right to say that your job's not like this high and mighty thing. But I think some people have like a real difficulty with kind of admitting to themselves that maybe what they're doing isn't this world altering pursuit, you know? And there's nothing wrong with that kind of humility in a job. Like, it is what it is. Like, let's not try to make it out to be something that it isn't. To go back to your dad quickly, you know, you said that with that memory with your mum and like at the
Yeah.
you standing at the top of the stairs and whatever else. Does that mean that your mum was kind of in on the act? And what I mean by that is just that like she knew the whole time, or the majority of the time, was helping your dad, let's say, cover up before he kind of told you everything, or did she kind of find out on a similar timeline to you? And if she was kind of in the cahoots with your dad, let's say, and knew about it, and you were just trying to shield her kids from it, did that ever become a problem when you found out? Like, did you kind of feel like your mum had, like, I don't know, betrayed your trust or anything along those lines?
I don't know the ins and outs in terms of what was known. I think my mum's never been a big drinker, even before she met my dad. So she knew my dad drank a lot, but I don't really know how much she knew until the sort of catalyst for him going into recovery. But I do think as a teenager I had a lot of resentment, which was probably undeserved, more towards her than to my dad, weirdly. I think, yeah, I kind of felt more betrayed. And I think there was one time I I really shouted at her and I kind of said, well, we've never spoken about it. You know, like my dad, that's my dad. And I can't remember what she came back with, but it sort of has taken me a long, long time to realize that the man that I call my dad, because it's my dad that had the problem and it's my dad that's gone through this and it's my life that's been affected. It's also her husband.
Yeah.
And she's had to deal with her husband going through this and the effect that it's having on her kids. And it's taken me a long time to realize that, because I think there was a lot of pent up feelings and anger about the whole situation. And it was never really a thing of deception. I think it was just that all those feelings you have when you're going through puberty anyway, your hormones are all over the place and you're kind of angry at the world in general. So then to then find that out, it wasn't necessarily like I'd felt I'd been lied to. It was just this thing of going, why is this my life? Which
Yeah.
you can kind of say with all things, but I don't think I'm lucky to say that it never got to the point where our relationships have been that deeply impacted by it. It's just, it was just that resentment of going, why do I have to deal with this?
Yeah. Why me?
Yeah, why do I have to have this? Is the thing I worry about. Like, why do I think there was a lot of things, especially when me and my sister got to the age where we started drinking. And, my dad would make a joke about saving me a seat at recovery, which I can now laugh about. But at the time, it's just, yeah, it's this frustration of going, why do I have to think about being hungover in front of my dad? Or why can't I have
Yeah.
friends around for pre-drinks? It's nothing he's ever stopped us from doing. But I think what I think is important to say is, especially when it's your parents, is to just allow yourself to have those feelings and go, yeah, it's annoying.
Yeah.
It is. There's times, and it's not something I'd cry about, but I do just go, I just want to have a pint with my dad. I think
Yeah.
I went for a drink with one of my close friends from school a couple of weeks ago, and he said, they both do music. They both are musicians, and my dad comments on his Facebook statuses. But my friend David said, "Oh, I'd love to go for a pint with your dad," and then he stopped himself and went, "Oh, well, like, you know what I mean, just a chat."
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, I guess there is a bit of like, oh, well, I'd love to go. My dad tells me stories about him on holiday, or when he used to travel for work when he was younger, pissed, and I just go, we would have had such fun.
Mm.
So I think, yeah, that it's mourning and grieving isn't the right word, but there is a little bit of that kind of going, it
Yeah.
sucks. It does suck,
Yeah. Yeah.
but
How was you touched on it briefly? How, because for people who don't know Ella can get smashed more than most people I've known.
thank you.
And she can do it on very cheap vodka, so her night doesn't seem to be that expensive. But how was that for you? Because you know how it is. You go to university. Uh, some people maybe didn't drink that much before university, and they kind of let loose at university, or maybe others did. But either way, especially when you're at Leeds Uni, which I think is probably one of the worst for partying and like drugs, even though they're, let's call them social drugs, in the sense of you're not doing them at home alone, but you're doing them when you're going on a night out. I still wonder how did you see that, when, with all of the stuff that you knew and kind of your personal experiences? Because to me, like, just from an outsider's point of view,
Hmm.
it seemed as if it never affected you. Like, I wouldn't have been able to tell that from how we would go out on a night out together, how you would drink.
Let's not implicate me.
Nope. How, if other people in the group did or did not do paraphernalia, I never kind of, I never saw you kind of take like a stance where I would have assumed, maybe wrongly, but I would have kind of assumed that someone who had seen their dad go through rehab and so on and so forth would maybe have taken, I don't know, kind of been more opposed to those things. And you were always kind of like a good time Charlie, like you were always up for a night out and whatever it was.
Yeah.
Is that a fair assumption of me,
Yeah, no,
or what were you dealing with things privately that maybe we didn't see when you went back like into your room or whatever it was?
no, not at all. I think when I remember always having this thing until I went to uni. Really, I was always quite against. I had this almost hierarchy of drugs, which the drugs that were you could do and they were allowed and they were fun because they were for parties, and the drugs that you absolutely could not do, and it kind of makes no sense now. And
Mm.
those morals swiftly went out the window. But no, it's never been something that I've had to go. I let me rephrase that. It's not something I think. Addiction and mental illness, there's a lot of argument to say it's hereditary, and it's not something that I disagree with. I know it's something that, like people inherit cancers,
Mm.
there is a higher chance of me suffering from these things, but I also think I could, as long as I have a stable sense of, my mental well-being,
Yeah,
I've never felt
at risk.
yeah, I've kind of, I'm not going to stop my life. I'm not going
Yeah,
to suddenly shut down and go, these things are awful. I think, and that's the most important thing. It's the addiction is a coping mechanism to deal with other things. It's
yeah,
not that you try a drug one time and become really addicted. That might happen, but the main cause of this is suffering in other aspects of your life mentally. And so as long as I think people are aware and well equipped to deal with those feelings if they ever come, I would like to think that I'm putting myself in good stead to not be to not go into that.
Yeah.
And I like a
Yeah.
party. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, no need to apologize. I mean, the question, your music taste is questionable, but I mean, it's fine.
How dare you?
But no, but also, yeah, I mean, it's obviously it's the right. You've come to the right kind of conclusion and assumption that I watched an interview recently where I was talking to the guy who was an expert in like kind of all kind of. He was a chemist and he was just an expert on like all drugs and like the kind of molecule kind of background to each single drug. And he said this one thing. He said drugs never killed anyone. He said humans kill ourselves. We just like we use the drugs overtly that
Mm-hmm.
make us killers. It's not like the drug is coming out all at you and like trying to get you. And do you know what I mean? It's like we are the ones who choose to use it, and you can use whatever it is once or twice, like you said, and you'll probably have a good time on it. As we're the ones who then choose to abuse those things and take it that step further. Which you then, if you're kind of unlucky, maybe go into addiction like your dad, and if you're really unlucky, you take it too far and potentially die. But I kind of wondered not just about yourself, but also like you never came across as judgy at Leeds Uni. It's funny because there's like two types of people out there at Leeds Uni. There's the people who kind of just accept that we're at Leeds Uni, it is what it is. You do it, you have a good time, and then that's that. And then there's people who come maybe still a bit wet behind the ears from sixth form, and they're like, "Oh no, I'm never going to do drugs." And then you see them in second year, and they're wearing like, do you know what I mean? The
Oh,
tie trousers and haven't washed their hair in 3 days, and you're like, oh right, okay, it's good to see how that one worked out for you. But we kind of dealt with drugs very flippantly at uni. I always thought, like, and it's fine, like they were party drugs, and it is what it is. But we never really like, no one really talked about it seriously and was like, mate, look, I think you should probably calm down because like you're doing this like 3-4 times a night, sorry, a week. And like I would have, this is just me, but I think if I had like your experiences, I maybe would have been a bit more judgy and maybe not like judgy, but maybe protective is the word, especially with friends, and been like, hey, look, like I know where this road leads to. I would just calm it down a little bit. Do you know what I mean? Whereas you kind of never seem to like have that outlook. Is that like
um,
where do you think that comes from? I think I feel like you were like really just I don't know. I feel like way more understanding than I would have been if I had your same experiences.
I think to be able to judge people, you kind of have to be perfect yourself. And I'm not in
Mm,
this situation to do that. I think what I was always reluctant, I think I was just more reluctant to get into those conversations. What I find what really upsets me is the when people talk about addiction kind of flippantly, and
yeah.
this thing of I'm addicted and I'm an alcoholic. That nothing angers me more than that phrase, which obviously is coming completely from personal experience, and
Mm,
I don't blame people for using language like that, because I probably do it for other topics that I just don't even
yeah.
think about. So I think it's to get into that kind of conversation would be to, again,
Open yourself
yeah,
up.
it involves a lot of opening up, and I think I'm not a kind of punching, is punching bag the right word? I don't want to have to expose myself every time I want to have a conversation about things, and
Mm,
I think that's why I kind of veer away from. I think I I'm very liberal in terms of drugs and all that kind of stuff, but what I could never stand was the people that talked about it more than they actually did them.
yeah.
That's what
I
I
think that
had
gets in
no
everyone's
time
tits.
for. I
Yeah.
didn't care. I had no interest. I think like everyone likes to have a good night out and be silly and do things and whatever, and that's fun. But the fun stopped for me as soon as it would be people talking about how constant. I think that was a thing massive at uni, massive at Leeds, was just to, drop in what they'd done over the weekend. And I just thought, I don't care, because to you it's a joke to say that you're an alcoholic because you've gone to an afters and had a pint at 12 o'clock. Like, that's a joke to you, and if you find that funny, you find that funny, but I don't.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. We were talking about the trauma top trumps at Leeds Union. There was definitely a thing of, well, two things: DJ top trumps and drug top trumps. Who could name the most obscure DJ and who could say what quantities of drugs they did and see if they could outdo each other. And it just got to the point where you're just like, this conversation is just nauseating.
Oh,
Can we please just stop?
also, because I just knew I'd outlast all of them on a night out. That's what I just felt sorry for them.
Yeah, you're just a hardcore bastard. So you're like, I pity these fools.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I think like the conversation's been like really, really insightful. I want to just thank you for your openness, because even though maybe we've touched on it slightly at university, at times we've definitely kind of never spoken about it with this honesty and openness before. So maybe it's taken coronavirus for us to do that. But I really want to thank you on that. Before I let you go, I just want to want to ask you how you get your shit together. But before you give me your answer, I just want to play what is in my mind the best podcast jingle going right now. I don't know what it is about those clicks, but they just put me in a good mood.
Did you make that
Ella,
yourself?
no, I wish I did. I wish I was that
Okay.
talented. I mean, we stole it off YouTube. Well, it's free, but yeah. So Ella, tell us how you, as an actress, help to keep your emotions in check and keep on top of your shit.
Keep on top of my shit. I love to do a list. I'm so boring, but I love to do like a checklist where I can tick things off. I find that borderline sexual, Sebastian.
What, but like chores or like
Just
things you have to do, or like list
everything.
of like, okay.
So it could be like, it could be doing, if I had emails to send, if I need to, call someone or meet someone, just little things. But I think it's so satisfying to me to break things down and to just look at what I have to do. And I always put more on there than I probably have time to do. And then I just transfer it to the next day. And I think that is, in terms of me actually getting the shit done, is my crucial one. But also what I love to do, which I can sadly no longer do, is I love walking, and not going on walks, because not somewhere, but to go somewhere where you've got a destination. I used to do this if I was auditioning in like central London. Say I was going from South Bank to Marylebone or somewhere where I could easily get the tube, but if I've got an hour or so spare, I'll just walk.
Yeah,
Can,
I'm so on that. I got
yeah,
onto that recently, just before coronavirus. Started to get into that, and then typical coronavirus came out. I was like, all right, nice one.
yeah,
So, but I like one of my friends. He's like a massive walker. And he's like, bro, just we were talking about losing weight and whatever else, and he's like, one easy thing is just walk. Like that, you'll lose weight before you even know it. But also, like, just for your headspace, and you can listen to podcasts or audio books or call friends or
yeah.
whatever it may be. I am so with you on that. And I think, you know what I think as well? People who live in big cities, we're so like in a rush all the time. Like
Yes.
obviously you're in London, I'm in Madrid. And it's like, and so I think we kind of see journey time as like, it can be optimized, right? Like, let's not
Mm-hmm.
waste time walking from A to B. We can just get the tube, we can get a bus, and it's like 10 minutes instead of an hour potentially, right? But then it's like, okay, that's fair enough if you've got to be somewhere at a specific time and you're kind of, you don't have the luxury of walking there because otherwise you'll be late. But I'm like, well, if you kind of can get there leisurely, why not walk? And I've like done this thing where when I'm walking, I really try to take in my surroundings.
Yes,
Like,
exactly.
look at this is going to sound a bit woo woo, but like looking at like little kids who are just like running up to their parents and laughing, or just doing dumb little kid shit, and it just makes you like laugh and smile. And like when you're on the like in this Madrid, it's called the metro, where like you're on it, everyone's just staring at their phone, even if there's no signal. You just stare at your phone to avoid eye contact.
Mm-hmm.
And like with like these drones, and then when you come out onto like the pavement and you walk, and then luckily in Madrid it's sunny more times than not, you can like see these like just little human interactions, right? And
Yeah.
I don't know, it just puts me in a good mood. It
I'm
really
such
does,
a
honestly.
dork. I love to like smile at random people and see if they smile back. Usually they don't,
Mm.
but sometimes they do. But the best walk in the whole of London is from South Embankment Station over Embankment
Uh-huh.
Bridge and across
Uh-huh.
down towards the National Theatre along the South Bank at like sunset. Me and my best friend Ella do this, and we started doing this when we were about 16, but we'd always go there, and it's just, I have these moments where I look around and I go, this is the best city in the world. And I just have that really sappy moment of being like, I'm just so happy to be here. that I think
100%.
yeah makes that
100%.
it makes that checklist seem easy, because it goes, I'm so grateful to be doing what I want to be doing, and in this little bubble, so why not actually enjoy it? So just smile at people on the tube, man.
100%. And also, when you're in a big city, like I find, I've been walking down streets, and I've lived here now 3 years total. I've been walking down streets that I never knew of,
Yeah.
because, like, obviously, I just get the metro everywhere, so it's just underground, and then, like, before you know, you pop up and you're in a different destination, and then, like, you go down these streets, and like, oh, that's a nice restaurant. I might go there one time. Oh, that's a fairly good. Like, that looks like a nice shop. I might take Louisa. Do you know what I mean? Like, and you're like, you kind of discover a city within the city, like a new part of the city, which you would have never ever have done, because obviously we all just kind of frequent the same little like pubs or whatever it may be, and we never go to different spots, especially when it's your hometown. Do you know what I mean? Because you're like, oh no, this is my spot. Like, I'm not going to leave here. And so I found, like, I've literally just seen a new Madrid. And so once this coronavirus comes, because we're not even allowed our daily walk in Spain, so once this coronavirus comes, I will be walking
You'll
non-stop.
be hitting those streets.
I will be hitting the streets, smiling at everyone. Well, Ella, I just want to thank you so much for coming on. I think it's really kind of brave and hopefully helpful for people who may be either suffering with addiction or know anyone who is suffering with addiction, to kind of listen to this conversation. I think it's been really, really helpful. Is there anything, like, I don't know, have you got any plugs that maybe you could do? I feel like maybe all of your shit got cancelled, right? With coronavirus.
All of my shit has been cancelled. But if anyone post-corona is looking for a currently pink-haired actress, hit me up.
Who could happily dye hair at the drop of a dime?
I will shave my head if you want me to. I'm waiting to do it, and no one will pay me for it.
I had to do it because Louisa fucked up my hair, and it is not a good look, I'm telling you. So maybe just hold up on that one. But yeah, guys, thank you so much if you've been listening. We really appreciate the support. As always, the typical like, subscribe, give us a rating, and spread it by word of mouth, which is always the best marketing scheme. Thank you so much, and we will see you guys in 2 weeks' time. Bye.